once there are 50 people, an organization will begin to hire administrative and operational roles that exist not to fulfill the purpose of the organization, but to fulfill the needs of the bureaucracy of the organization itself. And as soon as you begin adding those people, the company must then grow faster than it adds those people to not die. And that there's just this point where you reach, where you just sort of pass this Rubicon of no longer are people here for the same reason.
Welcome to the Eric Ries Show. I'm your host. Today we have Yancey Strickler, co-founder and former CEO of Kickstarter, also author of the book This Could Be Our Future, a Manifesto for a More Generous World, and now the founder of Metalabel. One of my favorite things about Yancey is that he understands that organization building is one of the artistic disciplines. And so he's found a unique way to blend his love of music and art, community, and companies all in one really delicious bento. I first met Yancey 10 years ago when he was the CEO of Kickstarter. He was my introduction to the idea of public benefit corps. And over the years, I've seen him grow as a thinker, as a company builder, as a CEO, and as someone who's deeply invested in the humanity of everybody who's trying to create art or create a company. Yancey is unusual as an entrepreneur speaker because he's had a lot of success, but he also still has a lot of humility. And as you'll see in the conversation, he's very honest and vulnerable about the things he did well and the mistakes that he made, but also the insecurities, the psychology, and even the spiritual dimension of what he was trying to build and is trying to build now. And so I hope entrepreneurs take not just inspiration from Yancey, but also the cautionary tale about the ways in which ego can lead to organizations not really living up to their full potential. Yancey is a leading thinker in this new movement who's trying to figure out how can companies be forces for good and how can we build a better society without having to give up on the simple idea that self-interest powers marketing. We had a wide-ranging conversation about the history of Kickstarter, about public benefit corporations, about our society's addiction to financial maximization, and so many other topics it's hard to summarize. Here's my conversation with Yancey Strickler. I've started a lot of companies, and I've helped a lot more people start companies too. And therefore, I've had a lot of banks and a lot of bank accounts. And so I'm really delighted that this episode is brought to you by Mercury, the company I trust for startup banking. Every time someone on my team uses their Mercury-linked debit card, I get an email with the details. And just that little bit of financial intelligence, always in my inbox, gives me a much clearer understanding of what we're spending. That's what Mercury is like through all its financial workflows. They're all powered by the bank account. Everything's automatic. And for those of us that remember the recent banking crisis, Mercury was there for a lot of startups who needed them. They've since launched features like Mercury Treasury and Mercury Vault, with up to $5 million in FDIC insurance through their partner bank and their sweep networks. Certain conditions must be satisfied for pass-through FDIC insurance to apply. Apply in minutes at mercury.com and join over 100,000 ambitious startups that trust Mercury to get them performing at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. This episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean, the cloud loved by developers and founders alike. Developing and deploying applications can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Scaling a startup can be a painful road, but it doesn't have to be. When you have the right cloud infrastructure, you can skip the complexity and focus on what matters most. DigitalOcean offers virtual machines, managed Kubernetes, plus new solutions like GPU compute. With a renewed focus on ensuring excellent performance for users all over the world, DigitalOcean has the essential tools developers need for today's modern applications, with the predictable pricing that startups want. Join the more than 600,000 developers who trust DigitalOcean today, with $200 in free credits and even more exclusive offers just for listeners at do.co/Eric. Terms and conditions apply. Yancey, thanks for coming on. Yancey, author of This Could Be Our Future, among many other things. Thanks for taking the time.
Always good to see you.
When I was reading the book, I really remember a tiny little tidbit you included, which just blew my mind, which was that the high five had to be invented in our lifetime, like in living memory, the high five was invented and people didn't do the high five before. And it's like, it's known when it was. So just talk about the origin of the high five.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah, that was, I believe it was 77 or 78. There was a player for the Pittsburgh Pirates who hit a home run in a big moment, and he came running around the bases, and his teammate was standing there waiting with his hands up. And the guy who hit the home run, whose name I forget, he talked about how he jumped up and slapped the guy's hand because he's quote, it seemed like the thing to do. And that then became a team celebration that they called a high five. And that became, a ubiquitous gesture and greeting. And I wrote about that story in the book because it's just one of those so trivial ways of revealing how much of the world has been authored, how much of the world is accidental, how much of the world is being written now that we really fail to appreciate. And so even something as simple as a physical greeting, I feel like we've seen fist bumps emerge in our lifetime, and that something so minor, but yet also so ubiquitous can just spontaneously emerge out of culture, out of human interaction is, I think, a simultaneously liberating and terrifying way of seeing things. And so I think a lot of that book, what I'm trying to create is that feeling for people, because my feeling of being a part of Kickstarter and watching an idea go from impossible to explain to ubiquitous and instantly understood.
And now I can't imagine how we ever live without it.
Yeah. And now I'm, that process was just mind blowing to me, even sitting in that seat and watching it happen. But that is just constantly happening. And our brains are evolved to constantly integrate new information, and it's amazing. It's all amazing, but it's one of those things that when you start to see it, it's like a word that just looks funny. It's just, seeing a little bit of the matrix is, really empowering.
In prep for this, I was asking various civilians, just so I interact with my life, if they could believe that this story was true or if they thought I was making it up. And 100% of people thought I was making it up. Nobody could believe that the high five had to be invented. That's just how presumably people have always had hands and they've always done that thing with the hands, right, and they've always called it the high. What else could it be? And it was such a great example that so much of our world had to be invented, and yet we completely take it for granted, such that when the next thing is invented, we act incredulous, even if we're old enough to remember that the previous thing had to be invented.
Yes. Oh, I know. Now I'm imagining at the Magna Carta signing, they high-fived.
Exactly.
It was all hands in the middle and hands out, USA. These things we're so conditioned by the water we swim in.
Mm-hmm. And we can't even see it.
And society depends on it in a lot of ways.
I think a really important place to start is just with the Kickstarter story. I mean, I think it's pretty well known now. You guys have been at it for a long time, and it's a pretty famous story. But, first of all, for those that don't know, you can tell the story of Kickstarter. But to me, I think you had such an interesting lens on it as a co-founder and then as CEO, and then now having had some time away from the company. I just would love to hear it kind of when you reflect on the story now, how does the origin of Kickstarter seem to you?
Yeah, this month, April 2024, is the 15 years since it first opened its door, April 28th, 2009. I mean, what really stands out was how much earlier it began than that. 2001 is when Perry Chen first had the idea of what is called crowdfunding. And, the 2001 internet was you have to have a closet full of servers, and there's no tooling. There's no tooling. You must be a deeply technical person. And I got involved in 2005. And during that period, and Charles Adler a year later, and what made Kickstarter possible, one of the things that made it possible was during those years, AWS and EC2 were created by Amazon. And there began to be these tools that allowed us, who were more liberal arts people, to make a website in a way that previously I think you really had to be a tech person, capital T, tech person, And so we were able to ride this wave of tooling that just let us be able to engage. We still, needed many very talented engineers to do anything, but we could get farther. And there was just years of us trying to explain the idea and really struggling to explain conditional purchasing. You have to get all these people and then something happens, and received a lot of blank stares. But the second the site was there and people could look at it, it was like instantaneous. People knew they got it. They got what it was. They got how to use it. And it was then just a few weeks of that the site really became alive, where people we didn't know were building projects and they were making the page emote and express and like be more than a form. And the internet just started doing its thing. And it was just I came to feel like that apparently the world had always been waiting for this door to exist, where everyone was lining up to like, they're pitching a corporate boardroom or record exec to get a green light so they could get money to do anything. And everyone is waiting in this one line. There's no other institutions to get funding. You're just like waiting this line. And then suddenly we just put this door next to it that's like, just self-validate. Do it with your own audience. Like, you don't need that line. And suddenly that created just this massive pouring of people to where it's now, it's almost $8 billion. I think it's moved through Kickstarter at this point. And it was as if the world had always been waiting for that to be there. And then there it was. And we got to feel just people discover it. And it happened community by community. It wasn't a rocket ship, but it was, I remember very distinctly, maybe a month or two in, there was an Indian classical dance performance project. One of these. So we proved everything before it went live. It went live. And then within a week, there were 10 other Indian classical dance projects. And we could see that, that person put it on Facebook or hit their email list. And we have just been validated as a viable option within that community. And now they're showing up. And this is how it works. It's just intra-community validation. This tool works for you. Maybe it'll work for me. And then people iteratively learning from each other. And it was just very organic, is an overused word, but it gave a sense of like, if you pull back the curtain on organic, what does it look like? And it looks like word of mouth validation. And this solves my problem. I also have that problem. So I will also try that. And to that, there was just such a truth to it. And we, having gone farther, being involved in other projects, I could see that we were fortunate that it wasn't a rocket ship, but within a month we could see, there's something. I know for a lot of projects, it could be a year before you get to like, there's something. But feeling that and never leaning all the way into it, always being careful about it. There's a book I've always loved called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. Sure. And there's by Jack Ries and Al Trout. And there's this one idea.
No relation to those who ask. Yeah.
yes. Is they have something called the law of fads and trends. And they say a fad is a trend whose demand has been satisfied. A trend is a fad whose demand is never satisfied. If you create something that has success, you will feel a first urge to satisfy all demand. This is the wrong way to think about it. Instead, you should think, how do we satisfy a core amount of demand, but always keep a ring of people that can't get in yet? And that the longer you just hold that, the more you elongate the fad. And if you elongate it long enough, it becomes a trend and is an organic thing on its own. So there's this way that we have an instinct of like, there's something, let's pour all the gas in it.
Let's maximize it to the hill.
Let's max that out. And laws of marketing, laws of desire, laws of like how people do things say, yes, there is mimetic desire, there is following, there's sheep, there's all that. But those are fads. Things that stand are things that, you have to work a little bit and it's not always there for you. And so, we always had this thought of like, we're not trying to be as big as possible. We're trying to be what feels right, what feels truthful in some nebulous way. And holding that type of line, I think builds trust and allows you to grow that ring of interest. And there's a lot of like those counterintuitive things of like, you don't lean in all the way, actually. You hold back a little bit because you have to think like a customer, think about desire, think about what you as a person are drawn to, and, how nice it is to flirt or be flirted with versus like just be told a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. It's someone trying to maximize you. It's not actually a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah. It was like a very delicate kind of journey, a real dance, I feel like. And and it gets harder as it goes. The bigger it gets, the harder it gets.
Talk about the difficulty of it. Because, you were not a prototypical tech founder. You've been a music journalist, right? Before doing Kickstarter. And then you kind of were thrust into this like tech co-founder role. And now you're, once the thing starts to take off, you're like buried, I can imagine, in operational details, the kind of the logistics of like who to let in and not know how to navigate the tensions with investors, and the fact that there's all of a sudden a significant amount of money flowing through the platform. Now you got fraud on the platform. I remember very early on when you guys started to develop standards for who was allowed to post a project and who wasn't, and basically like clamp down on your own growth for the sake of the authenticity of the experience for the customer. I mean, it was like one thing after another. Well, talk about what that was like in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of crisis hopping of just, if you're an open system on the web or open-ish and you're letting the raw internet through, it's going to be unpredictable, which is what you want, but not always. I always found the crisis moments were, in a way, looked forward to them because they forced you to get to truth. Every crisis I found, there would be initial instinct of like, how do we just make this go away? How do we get rid of this? And then if you're honest with yourself, you realize, oh, that's not real. That's not the real answer here.
Look about an actual crisis that you remember.
Well, there's the one around the when we introduced standards really for the first time. And what we found was that it was a moment when a project had raised $1 million in 24 hours, showing only a 3D rendering of a pair of like VR goggles. It's just a 3D rendering of a spinning video for like 15 seconds. That's all it was. And it raised so much money. And it was a big story, like really positive story. Look at this great tech thing. But our sense internally was, hey, this is a problem because we look at this and we think this team isn't showing anything. And the reason it's getting so funded is because people are trusting us because we put care into the system. And so effectively, a customer is like spending our trust on their behalf. And that's a problem. That's a bad move. So then what do you do about that? And one hand could be, you just slap a bunch of rules or something, which was a part of it. But also there's just a deeper question of like, what is it that we're really saying here? What is it that's most important? So there was like a whole day where a group of 5 or 6 of us were locked into a room and we're talking about just like sort of stuck on this question. And there was a point, I find this over and over, there's a point, it's just past the point of exhaustion where everyone is like, don't ask me anything. Like, I'm so done. You're just like stuffing greasy food in your mouth and you just feel like an idiot. And then at that moment, someone said, what is it we're trying to say? And a great early Kickstarter employee, Megan O'Connell, said, Kickstarter's not a store. And we're like, yes, that is why we've been in this room for a whole day, is to hear those like 5 words. And so that became a way to deeply understand what it was we were saying.
Explain what you meant by that. Yeah.
Yeah. What we want to say is that this is not a traditional marketplace. People might present their work as if like, buy it now and all these things. But we are saying we have no interest in being a store. We want to be a place where people are, there's a bit of speculation on what will someone be able to make or not. But we want to just ground this as being not a retail space, but a early funding space, a different category. And so we end up creating rules about what it meant to present work as a work in progress versus a finished product. as we like defined those things, but they're all laddering up to this core idea of Kickstarter is not a store. And the only way that we were able to get to that clarity was this like pressure cooker of 24 hours of us just internally feeling like there's something wrong and just not letting go of that feeling. And it brought us to a place of truth. And I remember the day Perry and I spent that whole day writing that. Then we posted them that day. It was a Thursday. And that night it was the number one thing on Hacker News. And there were hundreds of comments of people furious at us for being like, you are infantilizing me as a user. Like I deserve the right to make my decision. Read through, responded to a lot of those comments, read them all. But I just had this strong conviction that this was a good decision for the company. And I felt that way because it was contrary to our immediate term financial interests, but it felt aligned with what the project was actually about. And I could see that was not an easy choice. It was not the obvious choice, but it was a decision that we got to through getting to a truth.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was a sacrifice.
It was a sacrifice. Yes. I mean, in crises, companies have to sacrifice. I always say like, you have to like get on your belly and humble yourself all the way, because as most likely the biggest entity in that situation, you have a lot of the responsibility. And so what does it mean to like own that, to step into that in the right way?
Well, and you're asking people to trust you. I mean, that to trust to me is Kickstarter is such a great example of a business whose only real asset is trust.
But there remains a challenge for Kickstarter, which is, it relies on trust. It's also about funding the speculative things. And there is a core challenge that remains a challenge, that funding the creation of creative projects of like a comic book or, those are very safe things to fund because they're tight communities.
Sure.
Someone's you're only getting funding if you have reputation. It's like, everything's aligned. But a speculative product is something that you can advertise on Instagram. And a lot of people are interested in a new razor, or a new whatever. And they're not vetting who is this team. They're not thinking about that at all. They're just thinking like, oh yeah, I normally buy Gillette and now I'm going to buy this. And so the entire incentive structure and ways of balancing out interests become a lot harder. And yet those projects are the ones that have the biggest reach, have the biggest scale, make the most money. And so there is an inherent tension that is very hard. And because if you tried, there's this choice of like, okay, well then let's like put a hard wall then. You can't do that. Well, then it's like, then you end up in a store. Is it only things that have no risk and can be made? Is it okay for there to be failure? We feel like a failure should be okay, but how much failure is okay? And this is true of a creative life too, but like certain themes or challenges, they keep recurring. You like graduate, you become a more elevated version of it, but like they stay around. And a lot of the core challenges that we discovered in Kickstarter became ones that feel maybe they're inherent to the model. Maybe they provide, they reveal where there's a ceiling, or this is a great avenue, or this is a risky avenue. And, but over time, just more and more of your energy goes to the things that are hard to fix, and less into the green field of like, we could do this. And it's one of the many ways I think all projects get more challenging the longer they go.
Yeah, like in a video game where the boss of one level is the Goomba of the next level. Entrepreneurship always has felt that way to me about it. So going back to those early days, you didn't start out as the CEO. You were
I was like community,
forward
facing.
So talk about the decision to take on the CEO mantle and what that was like.
I mean, we as founders had always been very closely aligned, and Perry and I had always been close partners, close friends. And it was like 2013, so maybe 3.5, 4 years in, that Perry started talking about how he just was ready to step into a chair. And, I think it's not an easy job or fun job. And so we just began this long process of a transition. And it ended up working out that the start of Jan 1, 2014 was my first official day as CEO, which also was our first day in our new office, which was this giant pencil factory in Brooklyn we bought that was 30,000 square feet. And we moved there my first day as CEO as a team of 60 people. And everyone's like, what? What is supposed to happen here?
Oh,
it was quite a moment of like a lot of changes stacked. But yeah, I mean, I was excited to step into that. I was anxious about stepping into that.
What's Jan 1 like? Your first day with the new business card?
I think I just felt everyone watching me. if I go back, what is my memory of just, every
strange feeling? Yeah, it was really odd.
Every emotion, everything is like just communicates a lot to people. And yeah, I mean, I just felt I was always such a strong advocate for the Kickstarter community, for creative people in general. I'd been involved in hiring most of the company. Like I just felt, and still do, just felt a strong sense of pride and, just wanting to champion everyone. And initially, I think I fell into the same trap that I think is so common, which is, I need to like make my mark of what is my leadership about, right? Yeah. Which is just like silly. I now see it as silly, but because I've advised other CEOs, yes, and it's like
do the work, whatever it turns out to be will be your style.
Yeah, and now it's I just see like that is a seat. That seat belongs to the institution. You are the person in that seat, but it is the seat that's there, not you. You're serving that seat, and I got there. But yeah, initially, just being young. It's so embarrassing, but just being young. And yeah, I mean, I was CEO for almost 4 years. And I would say the first 2.5, I would say were very successful. They were like the biggest years in the company's lifetime and big projects are happening. And it's just like there's just like a lot of good energy. And then I made a few clear, obvious, in retrospect, mistakes of, hiring new senior talent and having like a 50% hit rate, which now I'm like, hey, that's about right. But back then you're like, oh my God, it didn't work. I thought, you just like don't have the context to be like, oh, you need to be ready that you can't know everything. And so things like that, maybe me experiencing them at that level for the first time, harder.
Yeah, first time it's really challenging.
Harder than they need to be. And by the end was like, had reached a place of almost burnout from, it was like two things, or I don't know, more than two, but one was just I found the recruiting leaders process to be so exhausting.
So tiring.
Where I was just like, I was on a new first date every night of trying to convince someone that they should want to be a part of Kickstarter. And I was very good at that, passionate about it, but it empties you out. There's only so much you can do that without, if you're not feeding yourself correctly. And I wasn't. I was just all in. And so that started to bleed me. And then at the board level, they, they saw my rookie flailings, and at some moments I was judged with generosity. At other moments I was not. And I started to get a lot of pressure there, even though to my mind, the company was doing well and I'm just like figuring it out and we're doing our best. Mm-hmm. But of course,
well compared to what?
You're, 160 people and we have, this much revenue a year. And yeah. And so it really reached a point of, just a lot of pressure. And in the end, an agreement between the board and me that, yes, find a different leader, And, that was brutal. It was brutal. I mean, I was a part of that conversation and I was really trying to look out for Kickstarter, but I also was just still in my own experience. I feel like I couldn't see myself clearly enough. And, yeah, and that led to, a couple of the hardest years of my life of feeling like this thing that I had made and that was a core part of me and I was a core part of it that like wasn't part of me anymore. Or, I'd been the Kickstarter guy for 10 years. So who's Yancey? And you just...
Yeah. Who are you when that's taken away? Well, so I'm curious, actually, one thing I've always wondered is, because you, if I remember right, you actually exited the company and like left the board and really took a break from Kickstarter after.
Yeah.
Do you feel like if you had ultimately not decided to step into the CEO seat, there's a chance you might still be there? But we wouldn't have had this kind of like tension that you then ultimately had to resolve in that way.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I did. I was on the board. I asked to leave the board. I kind of I didn't see how I could be half in or partially in.
Yeah, and I know a lot of founders feel that way.
Yeah, it's just like, why? Who is that for, really? And I just an instinct I had was like, I just need to kind of throw away that part of my brain. And it was a very hard call, but I've been so thankful I made that decision, even as it's had led to other moments of pain and struggle. But it gave me the freedom to create a new chapter in my life rather than
we didn't get to, I know a lot of founders
holding on to.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I wrote a piece a bit ago that I think you reacted to about like how to start a new thing. Mm-hmm. And I talk about, and it's sort of like detailing the emotional journey of just like, you think you have an idea and it ends with this idea that all new things die and that we have this desire to keep things permanent, but like we shouldn't think that way. And that the last step of creating something is to acknowledge that it is separate from you and that you are not it. And, that took me maybe 4 years of being gone to reach that point. And that became a new kind of, just as like creating something was a gift, like it's also a gift to be able to allow yourself to separate is another kind of gift to give yourself. And I have a new project now that is like having me retake these steps where I'm be able to see every moment. I can feel my growth. I can sense it. And that is its own kind of gift. But yeah, the pain of having to disentangle yourself from something that to which you feel is a part of you, and it is you, but it is not. But also it is not. And I feel like I'm still learning from that. And again, the word that just keeps coming to my tongue whenever I think about it is a gift. It's just like, you're being given the opportunity to discover and manifest who you are and what you can be and what you're not. And it feels to me like the most valuable thing there really is.
I appreciate you sharing about it in such an honest and vulnerable way. This is not the first time we've had this conversation, and I know you've shared with a lot of other CEOs over the years. But I think that recognition that a company is really a superorganism, that exists apart from any of the people who are in it, including the ones that nominally own it, control it, birth it, found it. That's really difficult for founders to process. I think it's difficult for a lot of people, but it's, to me, such a key realization, going right back to the thing you were bringing up before, which is like, how can anyone, as a customer, as an investor, as an employee, can anyone really trust an organization in any way? It's like, who actually can make promises on behalf of the organization? No individual person can, because any individual person might be gone. The organization presumably will live on, or the person might live with the organization, die, or vice versa. You have all these different possibilities. And so once you realize that, you start to ask yourself these questions about, what would it look like for an organization to make a promise that you could believe? And it's like, from the operational difficulty of that it goes from being the son of like paralyzing fear to like a real opportunity. And I remember one of the first times that you were I think you are the CEO at the time that we first met. You Kickstarter was one of the first, if not the first, public benefit corps to do the conversion in Delaware. And certainly for me, it was one of the first ones that I had ever encountered. And I think for a lot of people listening, they'll have thought, as I did, that the public benefit corp was the same as the little B with the circle in it, the B Corp thing. And you were the one who actually sat me down to be like, no, that's something different. And let me explain to you.
Yeah.
It's extremely confusing. Well, it has really been good for the B Corp movement, but very confusing for the public benefit corp idea. So first of all, just describe, since you did it for me, do it for everybody else listening. Like, what is a public benefit corp, and why did you make the decision for Kickstarter to be among the first to do it?
Yeah. Public benefit corp is a legal structure for a for-profit company, but where you basically take charge of writing your corporate bylaws in a way where you can set goals for the company that are to be held in parallel with the profit motivation. And so rather than the default C Corp assumption that everything must ladder to value profit maximization, instead, you're authoring what those traits should be. We'd always had that ethos of Kickstarter is, we're lots of punk rock young person opinions of, everyone else is stupid. It's so obvious. We're gonna do this. More things to look back on with embarrassment. But we had that idea, and then it was a USV partner, Albert Wenger, who came to us and said, "Hey, love Albert." Came and said, "Hey, with all this stuff you're talking, there's a way you could actually do it." And this is when the law was first happening in California, and so we started exploring it and ended up really liking the idea because. What is a promise you can trust from a corporation or an entity? I think you can only trust what someone does and not what they say as a corporation. Do not say I think is the right emphasis. So for us, we'd always said we're different, but we're also aware that hey, legally speaking, we're not different. And that's, we should be real about that. So we ended up creating a charter, 12, I think, provisions in there. Of how we would be different, and included allocating 5% of profits every year to certain causes, and prohibiting tax avoidance by the company, and various things that then went to a vote for all of our shareholders. It had to be approved, got 100% approval by shareholders, and then we reclassified our corporate status. You're supposed to produce an annual report, which we always do, but there's no tax advantages. There's no other real advantage along those lines, but it's a way of asserting and being real about what your values are. And so, very proud that Kickstarter was trying to, trying to push corporate governance forward. Mm-hmm. I could feel, I was CEO when we made that change, and I could feel the difference of, whereas in the past, it would be should we engage in this issue, or what should we do? And instead, our charter would say, actually, these are things rights of artists, you do need to engage on. So it's okay, mm-hmm. We'll do that. So it did have a practical difference. I would say today, I don't know that I think PBCs are the future. I don't know that I would say capitalism is going to do its thing wherever you are. I think there are other interesting mechanics to think about for better governance. Yeah. One of my co-founders in Metalabel is Austin Roby, who's very vocal in the co-op movement, cooperative ownership of things. So I think there's a range of
the perpetual purpose trust, the voting trust, all these cool structures available.
There's lots of structures. What is most meaningful? What creates critical mass? Still TBD, I think.
Yeah. When you look back on it now, do you feel like you guys kind of held it as the one weird trick? You do the PBC conversion and then you're your corporate governance structural stuff is solved, versus seeing it as the first step in a journey. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it maybe it reset a clock. And in terms of what is the outcome? And, mm-hmm. Kickstarter's been profitable since month 14, and soon after we made the PBC conversion, we began paying out an annual dividend. And so setting aside a percentage of profits each year, distributing it to investors, because part of being a PBC is also inherent in that is hey, we're not trying to IPO, or we're not trying to sell the company. Mm-hmm. We just want to run a good business that just, we allocate our money well. We run a good machine. And so just trying to establish, what does that path look like as an investor? And it looks like, hey, we'll profit share, and, we're just going to be a well-run company. And so that's continued to generally be the model, but it's not easy. Like the late stages of things are hard. It works great if you're a stable, well-run business with a small team. The YNABs of the world, you need a budget, like one of the best run companies ever, the Craigslist of the world. Like there are projects that have themselves together and can, 37 signals, like they have a sense of how big their throughput pipe needs to be. And they're just willing to be that. Mm-hmm. And they're not trying to hyper blitz scale beyond that. Yeah. And that's what we aspire to at Kickstarter. It's what I aspire to, with the current project in Metalabel. But those are still hard, they're still hard things to run because you're still in the world every day, just grinding it out.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was reading an article recently, about Kickstarter. I don't know, I remember what outlet it was in, but it was kind of like sort of like what's up with Kickstarter lately, and also a bit of an expose. Yeah. And it was kind of critical in tone, and it was interesting. It was going through different challenges companies had, but like if you kind of zoom out, the whole article, like everything about the article would just come back to that the company was not growing as much as it should. Yeah. And I had to get to the whole article where I was like, wait a minute, are they saying that the company's been like stable and profitable this whole time? And I was like, the article didn't say. And I was like, I think my assumption of this, I'm like, and I read articles and I meet with founders every day. I've told people who are losing so much money. It's like hemorrhaging cash like you wouldn't believe. But it's like somehow we've got this world where like being stable, like not growing as much as you quote unquote should, is like almost worse than if you were losing, maybe if you were burning money. I was curious how you look back on it now. You've had a few years away from the business. Like, cause when I read the article, you're like, well, maybe this is just the size of the market of these kinds of projects that exist in the world. Like human creativity is quite amazing, but like, it's not like you could just magically make more of it happen. It has to happen in this organic way. So I'm just curious, like, how do you look back on it now? Like, do you kind of buy into the idea that like there's something that could have or should be different about Kickstarter? Or do you feel like it's just like it's yet another sign of Kickstarter being different from the norm?
I mean, there are a couple of forks in the road I look at and think about, if there hadn't been backlash to Zach Braff, his project, like there are a lot of big, great Hollywood people that were going to release work that we were working with that got scared. What's that fork in the road like? If, there's a couple, but I generally trust the public and people that they know what's best for them, and that I don't want to say markets are right, but like, I don't know. There's just, there's an order that emerges that I just generally think is reflective of some deeper truth. And crowdfunding is never going away. It is a part of like the human toolkit moving forward. Crowdfunding works super well for charity, which we never wanted to support. Always saw that as a big business, but like, yeah, always saw there would be a GoFundMe. Great. That's not what we're about. And then for certain creative categories, it works great. Games works great. That's a community that the language it lines up with. And there are other more prestige-oriented creative fields where the idea of publicly asking for money is just like a non-starter. It's like, as a fine artist, as a musician, my goal is to legitimacy max everything I do. Asking for public money is delegitimizing because it says I need money. And so that I can't do that. And so then, so in certain areas, there's a little bit of a cap of the ceiling based on the current product and what the experience is. And you just arrive at those norms. And so Kickstarter has, I think, 12 categories, creative categories on it. Maybe like 8 of those have strong product market fit. Maybe 4 did, now don't, and might again. And meanwhile, like when we started Kickstarter, like all of our early pitch meetings were about how we're going to help creative people make things. Over and over, the world, I heard from investors, the world doesn't need more art. People are starving artists for a reason.
Oh, no, really?
No one wants this. Like, the creator as a consumer category was nowhere on the roadmap.
Right. Oh, we've come a long way from that.
We were thinking we have a product that's meant to serve an artist, a chef, a designer, a musician. Like, what are these people? Even coming up with the word creator was like a big thing of like, what do you call this wide group of people? That was not a term that existed. It was like YouTube and us were the ones starting to use that term early on. And so even that is like a customer base and use case worth serving was just like nowhere on the map. And now, like, we're 15 years into, creator economy and VCs talking their books through
way
framing.
Way more trendy now.
And ironically, I think that generation of the creator economy, I think that it has reached an apex recently. I also think the current mode has reached a ceiling where like the dominant mode of the creator economy today is a subscription. Subscribe to me. But when someone starts a Patreon or even someone starts a Substack, you will see like a decrease in output, decline. People feel trapped. You're on a hamster wheel of just producing more content. And so people reach a burnout point with those things. And so I think that there is that system of maximizing content production on platforms has been perfected, which is really good for those platforms. But
it's like factory farming of content almost.
Yes, but the lived experience for a creative person is not great. There is a lot more opportunity, but it's crowded. And what I see is that there is a different path. I think the path forward is not subscriptions. I think the path forward is splits and passive income. So what Metalabel is a new marketplace launching right now. It's a new space to sell, release creative work. And when you make a work on Metalabel, you are encouraged to put the outlines of everybody involved. It's a way for groups of people to release work together.
That's great.
And when you sell work, you can create a bundle of like a book and a digital thing and join the Telegram. You can put a paywall in front of anything. And then you set the financial split for each release. So it could be that 4 of us started something together and we've agreed beforehand, okay, 30% of the money is going to go into our shared treasury of money we can use later. Other than that 30%, all the money will be split equally between us. Mm-hmm. And what we have created at Metalabel is where you can define your split and we could just set the percentages. And from that point on, all funds will automatically flow to those bank accounts without a central account. This is something new, never existed before, new primitive on the web for fiat money splits to exist. But like what that gets you is instead of being a creator, it's like, I got to get another sub and just keep putting out content. You can get a residual, a royalty, passive income on anything you've made because it could just sit there. And every time someone buys one, you get your 10%. And like as a creator on Metalabel, you have your earnings table where you'll see for every release, like here's how much your split is right now. You can withdraw whenever you want. But it's like, rather than valuing content production, we're valuing like the work itself. And if you make a great work and you sell it, you get paid. And it's not just about the performance of being a creator. Mm-hmm. And all of these systems we optimize and maximize to the nth degree. And then someone will be like, wait, but actually it's the wrong system. It should be over here. And then we can do it better over here. Yes.
In Metalabel, do you have a role for curators? I was thinking about someone who like can bundle and rediscover old works, like kind of like almost like a retailer to the wholesaler of the creator.
Yes. Yeah, because we have this notion of a label. And so it's taking the idea of like an indie record label where, you're Epitaph Records and you put out punk from the Bay Area. So like everything you put out, people have a sense of what you're about. But that same idea of a label can exist in any creative field. There could be a YouTuber label, a philosopher label, entrepreneur label. And you are self-legitimizing because you're saying, hey, we stand for whatever this idea. And you can just be dropping work, putting out work by anyone that you sign. You could say, hey, we love what you're doing. We'd love to like put out your next essay. Let's drop it with you, And so it's a different way that you can work together. So the first project we did is the Dark Forest anthology of the internet. So I wrote a piece a few years ago, and there's like 10 other great writers who wrote even better pieces about the same idea, like Venkatesh Rao and Josh Citarella. So we made a book, very nicely done book, sold out 1,000 copies in a few days. Every time someone buys a book, there's like a whole complicated transaction on the back end. The first $9,000 went to pay back the printers that I fronted the money for.
Right.
And after that, we all get a split. And so every author is going to end up getting more than $1,500 for an essay they wrote years ago. And we're also creating a label out of it. We're publishing other people's things now too, because other people are also writing about these ideas that we want to support. So it's seeing that as a different model for how creative people cannot be so isolated. But it's like at the top of the food chain too. There's a group debuting next week called Hard Art. All their work's gonna be on Metalabel, first time they're debuting, but it's started by Brian Eno, the designer as Devlin, the filmmaker Danny Boyle, like Jarvis Cocker at Pulp. Like 50 of the most important artists in the UK have formed this group together to put out work that's meant to bring the British public together. And so they're putting out releases, different ones by different members. Brian Eno will put out a book on Metalabel through those. And
how exciting.
But these are like the best artists in the world who are like, yeah, we're limited by just being these solo people. We want a place to be a peer. We want a place to like center what we care about and not just our career.
Mm-hmm.
So how big can that wave get? You know, how long does it take to evolve that behavior? My guess is a couple of years, but I think people are hungry for it. And, you know, to jump from like the sub model to a split model, to jump from the solo model to the cooperative model, those are things I'm investing my energy in. We'll see how successful it ends up being. But yeah, it's very exciting. Very exciting.
It really reminds me of so many people listening to, before we leave Kickstarter entirely for the conversation, there's a lot of people listening to this right now who were the beneficiaries of the Kickstarter that we did, you know, what was it, 2015 or 16 for the Leader's Guide. I remember calling you for advice about it, and you told me exactly what was going to happen, that it would be a huge success, and that, you know, it was like the best-selling book Kickstarter of all time, you know, up at that point. And anyway, but it was like it completely catalyzed a work that would not otherwise have been able to exist, could never have been traditionally published. And to this day, we did exactly what you described, one print run only. To this day, I still get people coming up to me and asking me, you know, is there any way to get their hands on a copy? You know, it's like, you know, it's like, no, I have a few left over, but that's really it. And when we eventually did an audiobook with Audible, and it led to a lot of good stuff. And of course, for me, really important part of the foundational research for what eventually became the Startup Way. So first of all, thank you for being the curator and the host of that process. But I totally see what you're saying. I can very much relate to what you're talking about, because I work with so many related thinkers and writers and entrepreneurs, and I'm always trying to find ways to support other people's work. I did an imprint with a publisher and did a lean series, but that, you know, was kind of, you know, which those books are great, but it was, you know, limited in what we could do. So I love the concept, and I totally like buy into the idea, like the content production pressure of having to be a quote unquote like official creator, cranking it out like that. That seems like a horror to me. And yet, yeah, how do you find ways to connect with other creators? How do you work together? How do you support each other's work? How do you release things together? That's a very cool primitive to have in the toolbox.
With you know, with all these things, with the things you've made, there's a danger that we see on the web and that social media creates of, been well documented, especially recently, but of audience capture, where if you think of every piece of content we're putting out, it's like a sonar, and that we're hearing back from what gets likes of like, well, you should be this or you should be that. And so this is the way social media has evolved the voice of how we speak, and it's like this playback mechanic.
Totally.
But
it's
that is
kind of operant conditioning.
Yeah, and that is a way to have a lot of success, or, you know, way more success than I've had on the internet. So like, whatever, I'm a hater, but a jealous hater. But at the same time, I think it's kind of a road to nowhere. And like what we need to more strongly defend is doing it for yourself. And like, Metalabel started with me being burnt out as like a guru running a community. And just, I found being a guru so boring. And I just longed for a peer. And it was like that search led me to research how the scientific revolution started. And I realized that the Royal Society was the first label, and like this whole thing unlocked. But it has entirely been me trying to speak to just this, broken voice that's just like, hey, you're doing what you want, but you're unhappy. You can't accept this. And I think for everyone's work, a friend of mine's a painter. He always says, what's most personal is what's most universal. And if we try to express our deepest, most specific personal fear, desire, whatever, that is what touches people. When we try to speak universally, like, I'm gonna recover Imagine, and I'm gonna put it on social media because I want to end world conflict. And no one believes you. no one. It's not real.
Yeah.
And doing it for yourself, it requires being in touch with yourself. It requires loving yourself. It requires being patient with yourself. But and doing that as a group of people, that is, I think, a fertile place for truth. And it's more from, it's listening to what's going on inside. It's not listening to the pings of the internet. Maybe you find the other people maybe you do finally express, oh my God, here's what I feel. And whatever, 10 people come back feeling the same. And you're like, oh my God, we're a squad now. But it starts with a self-knowledge. It doesn't start with just like tweeting about it or whatever. And I think that's where the kind of the models of the internet that we've gotten used to over the past couple of years, where they do run out of steam, and where there is an opportunity for, I don't know, I just think a new generation of how we're doing things. But that's maybe me being hopeful.
Well, I like it a lot. I certainly relate to that. It's kind of a spiritual idea that you have to go dig down deep in the well of your own connection to the source, and like through that access a universal truth that then can be expressed. And when you try to you wind up staying surface level. You lack authenticity. You lack that connection.
Yeah, I mean, every great idea I've ever had, I don't know where it came from. It was just there, and it is the oneness of the source that like you can make your mind soft enough to hear. And the piece about starting a new thing, it's about feeling that. And I think as a founder or as an entrepreneur, you have that mix of curiosity and drive that's like you're attuned. Or as an artist, you're attuned to hear those things. You are exercising to hear those things. And then, as you said, like those things we hear, they are alive on their own. I think of Metalabel. There's 8 of us on Metalabel. We all talk about Metalabel as being something we're listening to. It's like, what does it need? It exists beyond us without question. It has its own physics, its own personality that you need to listen to, be humble before, you're supporting it, you're serving it. And there's just so much art and humility and then really hard work that I think comes with seeing it through.
This episode is brought to you by my longtime friends at Neo4j, the graph database and analytics leader. Graph databases are based on the idea that relationships are everywhere. They help us understand the world around us. It's how our brains work, how the world works, and how data should work as a digital expression of our world. Graph is different. Relationships are the heart of graph databases. They find hidden patterns across billions of data connections deeply, easily, and quickly. It's why Neo4j is used by more than 75 of the Fortune 100 to solve problems such as curing cancer, going to Mars, investigative journalism, and hundreds of other use cases. Knowledge graphs have emerged as a central part of the generative AI stack. Gartner calls them the missing link between data and AI. Adding a knowledge graph to your AI applications leads to more accurate and complete results, accelerated development, and explainable AI decisions. All on the foundation of an enterprise-strength cloud database. Go to neo4j.com/ERIC to learn more. I really appreciate, especially it comes through so much in your writing, that you see organization building as one of the artistic disciplines. So, you talk so much about making music, and I mean, we should tell the Royal Society story, because that's totally fascinating. But like, there's a unity of understanding that all these creative disciplines have in common, and that entrepreneurship, institution building, aligning groups of people to accomplish something great, like that is an artistic enterprise and has a lot in common with the things we think of as quote unquote traditional art. So talk a little bit about I think we're really fascinating to have caught you in this moment in your life where, I think Metalabel, you're like launching imminently. I think by the time this airs, Metalabel either will have just launched or it's about to launch. So people should definitely check it out. But you have a moment where you can take all that you've learned, from your previous overnight success that was 10 years in the making, and pour it into this, into this journey. So just, so reflect on that a little bit. Like, what are some of the lessons you've taken into the design of Metalabel itself? As you obviously talked about seeing it as an independent being. That's such a critical first step. But then, like, what do you want its journey to be?
Again, I'll return to the word a gift. But early on, I saw the experience of like later day Kickstarter, where I'm at the top of a hierarchy, very hierarchical, making a lot of decisions, and just feeling that was not the optimal way to do things. And so, coming about it this way, much like with Kickstarter, we had a lot of intentional ideas about what we wanted to be and didn't want to be. But with Metalabel, try to design a different outcome just right from the beginning. So the idea is that we are a heterarchy, and a heterarchy is a fluid hierarchy. So you have to have hierarchies, you have to have decision makers. But the idea is that there's a different, most appropriate decision maker based on what the decision is. And so as the partners, we have partners and associates in the group. As partners, we are all at the top of a hierarchy in a different part of what we do, of design, of engineering, of product, of like operations. And every one of those people is expected to make a final call. And they don't need to consult the rest of the group unless they want to. But like, you're here, you're in that seat. You are the right person to be making that judgment. And so let's not have a single leader. Let's be full of leaders, and let's optimize for quick decision making based on who feels most right to make a call. Along with that, created everyone getting paid the same, had an interesting way to think about equity, where I thought the default as you think about equity is like, well, you're just trying to keep as much as you can and sell as little as possible. But if I thought instead of like, what is the value of founding a company? What is the value of having the idea of a company? And talking this through with my co-founder, Rob Kalin, who started Etsy, we came up with a funny math of saying, all right, the value of having the idea is 5%. The value of being a founder is 5%. And so we ended up creating this structure where there were 6 of us right there from pretty much the beginning. And so it's like, all right, so it ended up being 40% was split between us as like the founding share. And there's like, retention rates, other things that will let that grow. And, we've raised capital, but it's really just thinking of this. Yeah, just trying to think and anticipate how does this grow? What does this look like? What is our value versus the community's value? And so, getting to do it a second time, you just get to ask these types of questions. And then I get to feel on an emotional basis moments where I know a past me might have like been threatened or defensive, whereas a current me is like, oh, you should listen to this. This is going to hurt. Listen, and you just get to manage your own self more. And I still have moments where I've got to need 24 hours to get clear. And, those kinds of things always happen, but I just can feel that I know what's down certain roads. And they might not be exactly the same because things change, but you can kind of see how some things will play out, and so you can make a different choice. And I'm just a lot humbler. I'm a lot humbler. The first time around, you just think, oh, all these old people are so dumb. This is so obvious. And then you come to respect them, and you have a lot more humility. And, I talk a lot about both humility and fearlessness, everything is harder than you think. To do anything well is so hard. So hard. You cannot underestimate anything done well. But like, you can do anything well if you put in the work. Don't need to fear it. You got to be honest about it. And yeah, so that's just been it's all been very truthful and honest so far. And all these things work great in failure scenarios, actually. It's in success scenarios where they get hard. This is what happened at Kickstarter. We had a whole plan of like this whole bespoke thing. And then we became a top 10 company on the internet, for like this 1 year period. And then it's like all of your plans get blown up because you're like, oh my God, we have to, how can you not? And
right, how can you not?
We'll see if this project puts us in a position like that again. We'll see if I would make the same decisions again, but yeah, I didn't seek to start another company. Like I actively fought it. I did not wish for this. But the idea just didn't stop speaking to me. It just wouldn't let me go. And
I'm feeling very well. It's a curse in some ways. It's not, people imagine it like they show it in the movies, like hurrah, but it's not like that at all.
I mean, you're constantly, because I'm trying to manifest something that doesn't exist. I'm living in a place of constant doubt. And, that if you listen to is completely debilitating, you have to listen to it some.
And if you need some extra, just go tell some other people about your idea.
Yeah. Just
don't tell you all the reasons why it won't work and why it's a terrible idea. No problem.
But you mentioned, I'll tell the Royal Society story. You mentioned that. So this is like part of what brings me so much comfort. So in 1660 in London, there's a group of professors who all teach natural law, which was the term for things only God would know. And one of them is someone named Christopher Wren, later became Sir Christopher Wren. So they started meeting in a pub every Thursday. And
pub's still there, you can go there, right?
Yes. Yeah. And eventually someone said, we should start a club. And the club should be based on wanting to prove facts through evidence rather than by the decree of the church or the king. And so like, we should just start a club around that. Okay, cool. Let's start a club. And within about a year, they decided we should start publishing, I would call it a zine, but they started publishing a pamphlet called Philosophical Transactions. First one was in 1664. And it was a monthly, or I think quarterly and then monthly zine in which the members just wrote their attempts at conducting an experiment. Experiments hadn't existed before, but there's this iterative process where they would just try, and the next issue someone else would try. And this iterative process of just writing and detailing their attempts at what we now call science is what invented the scientific method. It is what invented peer review. They started pooling money together to like let people do bigger projects. And this is how the Babbage machine was made. This is how the first microscope was made. This is where Benjamin Franklin published the kite experiment. Everyone knows the kite experiment. How do people find out? He put it in Philosophical Transactions, the Royal Society's paper. And so this incremental process of just feeling out this future manifested science, manifested it, not with a single product, not with a, Steve Jobs TED talk or, this is like pitch talk.
No PR driven launch of the thing. It must have seemed so ridiculous in those early days. The early experiments were terrible by our standards.
Yes.
We were just trying random stuff. That's not science.
And it's just this iterative process. And what I came to see was, there was a name, the Royal Society. There was a point of view it represented, facts through evidence. And then there was anybody who had something to contribute, was welcome. And to me, that is the essence of like a label,
Royal Society is a label. I just love that metaphor. So
yes.
Cool.
Like I like reggae. I'll put out any great reggae by anybody, and that this is how, for centuries, this has actually been the dominant, most successful form of cultural production. And there's like examples all over the place. Right now, they're very institutionalized. There's a book publisher, there's a gallery, there's a VC firm, there's like different categories of groups of people aligned around a shared worldview and just trying to manifest that worldview. And I think the insight I had reading about the Royal Society and then connecting it to a project like Mischief or like the music labels I was a part of in the past was just to see that there is a superstructure underneath here that is quite powerful and durable. And the internet does not see the value of it because the internet is all individual author oriented. It's the same broadcasting model of the 20th century. But like internet native values are, the internet shows how we're all connected, even if we're entirely different in every other part of life. And the internet is what breaks through these like individual silos. And so this model is like, it's what we need. And it's been here forever, but it just got boring and like less cool. It got extractive. In the case of major labels and film studios, it became too extractive. We're too removed from the grassroots start of these things. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to be an extractor at a certain point. And and so it's trying to re-inject that energy in that model. So where, to me, if you take the casualness of a split, the casualness of like, just sign on to the form and publish, like you get a low key creative org where you don't have to file a 501c3. You don't need a bank account. Yeah, we do things together. Yeah, we're real. But yeah, no, we all have our own bank accounts. It's like, it's cool. It's cool. We're all free. Mm-hmm. We're all like sovereign, but the group is sovereign too, you know? And so I think we're at that point where the internet is ready for that. And so but there is that long history and, you know, science itself starting in the same way.
Have you thought about a mission trust or a co-op or a foundation, like some of the structural things that we were talking about before for Metalabel?
Yeah, we did. We've done a lot of research around those things. I think the model that is interesting is there are ways to have a co-op of users within your cap table.
Sure.
So like you can make the whole thing not a co-op, but you can create aspects of it that are cooperatively owned. I'm very interested in financial outcomes being something that people can participate in the future. Maybe governance participation in a much later stage. I think early on it should be the team leading governance decisions for the most part. But yeah, I mean, but we've done a lot of research on these things. Don't have a specific answer, have a lot of interest. But to me, like you have to make something in value first. So let's get over that hurdle.
That's
of
definitely
like,
job one. Yeah.
It's a machine that's worth distributing ownership of. And then we could think about what are the instruments that feel most appropriate.
Yeah. The equivalent of a sovereign wealth fund for a Metalabel nation is going to be really cool when the time comes. Not obviously it's early for something, but yeah, I'm excited to see what you do with it.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason is it's obviously it's going to be cool to have broadly shared prosperity and all that. You know, not to minimize that is obviously important, but there's also, you know, you're entering into the belly of the beast again of a thing that could inevitably become extractive unless you make different foundational choices now. And to me, one of the and I haven't plugged your book nearly enough. I hold it in my hands. I got to figure out how to plug it. It's really it's terrific. And one of the things I really liked about it is just really like making a clear distinction. Like making money is not itself the problem, but money has this gravity to it. And it's all too easy in our society, especially, to see making money through extractive or exploitative means as the same as making money through additive or generative means. And that those are actually two different activities. And once we account for them separately and we structure around them separately, like it really has a transformational effect on what it even means to make a profit in the first place. And I think we need a lot more of that in our world.
Well, I've come to see it makes it even harder in my mind, but I've come to feel like it is at the founding initial team stages of projects, I don't think that there is an extraction problem. I think that the founders are
a success problem.
You're creating value, and that's the whole point. But it's once you get multiple generations of owners in or of leaders in, it's like the default goes to extraction because everyone needs to be a grown up and everyone needs to whatever. And, you know, there's like, even if private equity is not involved, it's values are involved. And
how many great products have we all used as consumers that have been ruined that exact way? I mean, pick up the paper. You can read a story about that every day. And as a creator, it's just heartbreaking.
I mean, this is, Napoleon III was meant to lead France. The Puritans moved to America to create a perfect utopia, and then their kids rejected it. They didn't want it. Succession planning is an eternal challenge, and it's hard for businesses. I don't know the answer, but it's something I definitely think a lot about.
Yeah, working on it.
Wow. Yeah, that's you. That's you. Yeah. Exactly.
Working on it. I know. Yeah, no, but I mean, not to be facetious about it, but like there's a governance side to this and an operational side to it. And as long as we see those as two separate problems, we'll never solve them. Mm-hmm. So we gotta get there. One of the things I really liked in the book is you talked about, just in a very eloquent way, about how our society has become obsessed with financial maximization. And, we swim in that water so much, we kind of can't even imagine it any other way. And to me, it's just very refreshing to hear somebody who's saying, look, it doesn't mean that we have to burn everything to the ground, but we can ask ourselves, what is the purpose of these tools that we use every day and these organizations that we build? And these, like we've inherited this unbelievable infrastructure from our grandparents and their grandparents. We've inherited, we're the beneficiaries of this unbelievable system. And yet what are we using it for? And, would they be proud of what we've done with it? Like, I don't know. I think you're asking really important questions. So talk a little bit about just why you felt like that was such a core theme you wanted to write about, and what, like, if that isn't the central organizing principle, what could be?
I think I was reflecting on my experiences in leading an executive team or, at a board level, being in conversations where is it path A or path B? And there's not a clear answer. And what would often be the case is path A might have a clear financial outcome that we can talk about. And path B might have an outcome that's a lesser financial outcome, but is good in other areas that...
Or even a more uncertain financial outcome, not even necessarily...
a more uncertain financial outcome, but like more positive in other areas. And my sense was that in every case, the exception of an emergency, the group is going to opt for the financially maximizing outcome. And they're going to do it because the CFO, the COO are going to opt that way, and they're going to be seen as the voice of reason. Other people will be seen as like more emotional led judgment and, how much can you trust that? And there's just a casual, unthinking default to, well, whatever one is going to make the most revenue is the right choice. And within a corporate context, it certainly makes sense with how we think corporations are run, but it's just often in the corporations, not in their best interest.
Right. That's what's so interesting to me about it.
And
it winds up being not maximizing.
Yes. And the challenge is that I struggle to find a way to really have that conversation. And as a founder, you can do that because the founder has like voice of God power. And so you can say, no, we're not going to do that. It's really only the
moral
founder,
authority.
Yeah, that has that moral authority. I say in a crisis, people do opt for the less financially advantageous, do the more social good thing because they know they're being watched. That time they will always choose that option.
That's often also the reason they're in the crisis. Is because of a previous meeting they had where they made the wrong choice. In retrospect, the supposedly safe choice is the thing that led them to be in crisis.
Yes. And so what I kept imagining, being in multiple of those conversations and being the moral authority, but also like having very smart people who I trusted push back on the moral authority. And you're like swimming in uncertainty. You're like, what grounds do I grab onto? And so when I tried to imagine what is a different way, how does that conversation go differently? It just speaks to you need to have a clear map of like forms of value, essentially. And I came to see financial value as just a numerical expression of values of an organization. But that perhaps initially I thought maybe those other values can also be numerically defined. You can create proxies. I think that's dangerous and gets you in weird zones, but like that's one way to do it. But another way is to have what the book ends up going into is like a framework of that's something I call the Bento, which is a 2x2 matrix to see beyond the near-term orientation of a decision. That's just trying to give you a sense of the real landscape that's at play. And just to speak to that Bento thing for a minute. So the idea was, I imagine like the hockey stick graph of the line sloping up and to the right as like the most important icon of our time. This is all you're trying to get to is that. And there's a day I drew that hockey stick graph on a piece of paper, and then I just extended the x-axis of like time to make it much farther, and the y-axis measuring value, I made it extend way farther, to where suddenly this hockey stick was like this little flaccid line in the bottom left corner of this big expanse.
And what's in the white space? What's in the white space?
And I drew it 2 by 2 and saw like, oh, so this hockey stick, that lives in now me. What I as an individual or as a company, what we want for ourselves right now. That's where money, growth, all that lives. But there's also future me. What is the legacy? What is the brand? What is the identity we're trying to create? There's also in the top left, now us. Who are all the constituents that are part of this? It's not just me. It's my family or customers. And then future us. What is this world we're trying to reach to a generation from now? And so it was seeing that actually all 4 of those spaces are true dimensions of self-interest. Like not even like, being generous or whatever. It's like your self-interest actually. And
it contains those elements.
Yeah. And so it's just trying to put that like right on the map so that people would see it. And so that was my way of trying to speak to that quality. Interestingly, I've just found in the past 6 months that the Bento, which is the thing I quit being a guru of because I just got burnt out, is like very much alive now. And I've met a professor who's teaching it at Cornell and at Wharton, and that it was used in New York State. There was a disagreement among the hospital system on how to decarbonize, and the person had been trained in the Bento and used a Bento to map out everyone's self-interest, in which they saw that it was only their now me that disagreed, and they could see the other dimensions, and they like made a deal that they could sort of sift through what all was at play. So I think that it reveals something that is true, like it is a truth about us, and it's just making it more, just more in our face. And I've taught that model to thousands of people at this point, to a number of organizations. The one standout generalization I would make from this is that when men see the Bento, there's this action of like, holy shit, there's something more than now me. Whoa. Well, it's like, Keanu in the Matrix, like, whoa, I'm shocked. Whoa. This is blowing my mind. Women who see the Bento say, this is what I'm always thinking about. Like, I can use this. This is helpful. Thank you.
You say, help me organize all the thoughts I already have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I see this is why I can't sleep. I'm worrying about all these things all the time. And it's just so striking, like over and over and over, saw those like opposite outcomes over and over and over. So I think it reveals something about how we, where we need to grow. And
that's life under patriarchy. It's right there. It's not really good for anybody. And what I appreciate about the way you've written about this and talked about it is just to see the connection between the kind of personal spiritual dimension of like, what am I and what am I for? And to see that also as the same as the organizational dimension. What is my organization? What is it for? I think is so important because, as you said, this is not even getting into generosity. We're still in the realm purely of self-interest. Even at the organizational level, what is good for the organization? Acting in these extractive ways, that's a liability. That's creating future vulnerabilities that some other startup is going to exploit one day. So it's actually not profit maximizing, no matter what definition you use, to behave that way. And yet we've been hypnotized to look only at that tiny little quadrant and to do it that way.
Yeah, it's made me think that the answer is not to make the world more altruistic. It's actually to make the world more truly self-interested in a way. Mm-hmm. And it's just
to redefine what we mean by self. That would help a lot. Exactly. But like we can all still look out for our best interests and you know what? And we can create a better world by doing that. Mm-hmm. And it just requires widening the scope just a little bit. I want to do kind of a lightning round Just a couple of things we didn't get to because we could do this for 4 hours, no problem. You got so many interesting things that you've talked about. And I want to start by reading to you something you read, because we touched briefly on the new thing essay, but This is the quote that really stuck with me. So I'm just going to read it to you and have you explain. You said, "The goal then is to make a new thing that stays true, that stays lean and immune to the forces that will naturally slow and distract it, that keeps away the people who love money and will tear it apart to get it, a new thing that stays committed to its reasons for existence."
Yeah, that to me, I've come to see organizations as forces much greater than me. And as Kickstarter got bigger, as it got more professionalized, there was just this accrual of power and people into certain areas of the organization. It was like you'd hire one person and they hired 18 people, and you're like, and it was somehow all felt beyond your grasp. And you do these things because you say, well, this is, I think, is what you're supposed to do. This is like what the business books I read talk about, things like this. But those things are actually not in the interests of the organization. And those things are just a drift, an inertia, a momentum that is, it's a bureaucratic momentum, and that you have to actively resist that every single day. And it's like you have to wake up every day and be willing to fight, to say, no, we're not having another meeting. No, we're not adding another body. No, we're not doing this. And it's like a relentless push that you have to keep making. And because those forces are just way more powerful than you, and they are rational, they're logical, they're deeply embedded in culture, but I think they end up being problematic. And a lot of my first thinking for this came from a white paper by a physicist named Jeffrey West. And he had a paper, it was like 0506, and he talks about the golden ratio in biology, which is the idea that if you know an animal's weight, you can tell its gestation period, everything about it, basically, just based on its weight. And so he tried applying the same logic to human systems. And so he found for cities, if you told him how many gas stations were in a city, he could tell you its population. And like, there are all these ratios he found.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then he tried doing the same thing to organizations. And what he found with organizations is that organizations are organic life forms, by which he means they mature. And at the point of maturity, they begin to die. And so what is the point at which an organization matures? And so he did all this research, and he ended up saying that 50 people, an organization matures. And what he means by that,
at that point,
yes, is that once there are 50 people, an organization will begin to hire administrative and operational roles that exist not to fulfill the purpose of the organization, but to fulfill the needs of the bureaucracy of the organization itself. And as soon as you begin adding those people, the company must then grow faster than it adds those people to not die. And that there's just this point where you reach, where you just sort of pass this Rubicon of no longer are people here for the same reason. And
it's like the problem of senescence in biology. Yeah, it's the same.
And so for Kickstarter, that was where I mentioned, like, we got huge and our plans got blown up, but we were working on a model of we're never bigger than 50 people. Like, we had it written on a board where our last 23 hires, what they would be. And then suddenly, it's like, oh, we can't afford to do that. But I think that to maintain that specialness, that intimacy, that hunger, that drive, the entrepreneurial spirit, I think you have to resist these things as much as possible. Now, again, success scenarios make this so much harder. Stripe has always tried to be small, but now Stripe's like 4,000 people. And it's like, could you, is that possible to do with less? And if Stripe instead said our market is as big as, the 60 of us can support, is that a failure? Is that, it's like, they're hard things, but
we're all grappling with those problems.
I just feel humbled. And I feel like accepting a place of humility and thinking these forces are stronger than me. And so I must design systems that protect me from it. that instinctively feels to me like, that instinctively feels to me like a more successful path. But again, if Metalabel hits it big, it will all be challenged. But
these are the most avant-garde topics in corporate governance and really in company building and startup building. I know a lot of founders who are grappling with these questions now, and I think it's actually an exciting time. We're going to see a lot of innovation in the form of the thing, and not just.
I mean, they're controversial for their governance, but like I pay a lot of attention to what Coinbase does, for example, because I feel like there's certain people, Coinbase 37 Signals, that are asking, they're asking questions.
Yeah. That's important.
And they are the right questions. And
Okay. You mentioned the dark forest in the context of the dark forest anthology, but just talk. I love that essay, was so interesting. Just explain what the dark forest is and why it was worth making an anthology about.
So 5 years ago, I wrote an essay about how I felt afraid to be myself online. And I compared it to an idea in Fermi's paradox, which says, if we look into the heavens, things are quiet. We send out beacons of signals to say, hey, here we are. And no one else answers. So we conclude then that space is empty. The universe is empty. But instead, imagine the universe is a dark forest at night. You also might listen and think there's no one there because it's empty, and you make a sound and no one answers. But the truth is that the dark forest is full of life. Everyone just learned it's too dangerous to show yourself. And I said that the internet had become a dark forest, and that I no longer felt comfortable sharing what I really thought on any open channels because there were just threats everywhere. Trolls, hype, advertisers, all these things, and that the internet had just become a battleground for power. And so instead, what I had realized I was doing and what I thought other people were doing is that we were retreating from these main spaces to like our own real dark forests where
absolutely
we can be honest, but it's within the context of a group chat. Or we can have a conversation on the podcast where I will be honest here about things I would never say on Twitter because the whole context and meaning of it changes. It's a safer space. And so I was just identifying that was happening in my own behavior and just imagining what does that mean for the internet if we're all being not our real selves in the main spaces anymore? Like where does that ultimately go?
Yeah. And we still conclude that what's happening in the main space is what's happening.
Yeah.
We've ceded that territory to the worst of us. Yeah.
Yes. And so I sent that was like an email in my tiny letter to 500 people. And it ended up going super viral, hundreds of thousands of readers. And then Venkatesh Rao built on that to say that there's this cozy web, a place where it's like, it's a dark forest, not because you're doing conspiracies, but just because like you just want to have more protection. And then as we go into COVID, like these dark forest spaces suddenly became like mainstream and what we were all doing. And this like theoretical concept of maybe these little group chats are like our own little societies became actually, no, these are like, to use a Balaji term, these are states, these are network states. It's like accelerating this process. And now a piece that is the final piece in this most recent book that I'm going to post online soon is called The Post-Individual. And it's this idea about how the internet has redefined individuality, and to go online is to be reborn as an individual, where you are no longer tied to what you look like, where you come from, anything about you. You are invited to redefine yourself. And to me, the historical parallel is the creation of Western individualism itself. And this happened in about 1100 AD. And it happened when in Southern Europe, the Catholic Church banned cousin marriage. And at the time, the power that existed was through clans, families. And the patriarchs and matriarchs of a family would marry the children of the family to each other to keep the bloodline. The Catholic Church wanted to break this power, so they banned cousin marriage. And within a century of cousin marriage being banned, the city took off in a way it never had before. the guild was invented and the university was invented, because suddenly newly liberated individuals were going places to meet other individuals, and they needed this shared context in which they could work or learn or love or like make a society. And so society shifted from family, clan, blood power to networks of liberated individuals.
Individual power. Yeah.
And that world has overtaken the world it came from today. And it's like all of our values today really originate from that point. And I think the same thing is happening on the internet, and that we have become re-individualized. And what we have discovered is we need shared context. We need safety. We need institutions. We need love. We need all these things in this new space. And so all of us have all of these alts we're using that represent slices of ourselves. And all of our alts are meeting with the alts of other people online and making a new society. And that the values and structures that we're making in this society, I think, will define the next 1,000 years. I think, because even the notion of what an individual is has changed. We've gone from one person, one vote. Now it's like one identity, one vote. And we're cool with that. Like this, it's an idea that we're quickly becoming accustomed to. And so I feel like the whole dark forest, people going to these spaces, all this, I believe that this is a smoke and the fire, and that this is like this really big signals a big change that we're bobbing on the surface of in the early days. But to me, there's a trend line here that I can't even imagine where it will go.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because people have so far in our lifetimes have seen the internet as an institution destroyer, breaking of barriers and frankly, the destruction of the civic infrastructure and institutions that most of us live with. But I think we have not yet really realized its power as an institution creator. And so the new civic fabric that will be built out of new institutions, I'm glad we started with the high five, because like Kickstarter, right? Like now we can't imagine creative life without that tool in our toolbox. That's hopefully the harbinger of a lot of really cool things to come that our kids and grandkids will think as obvious as the high five is to us. Yeah,
I think online first institutions will be to the 21st century what the corporation was to the 20th. It's going to be the dominant form by which culture is shaped and made. And an online institution is something any one of us can create and be a part of. There's zero barrier to entry. And that is the track we're on. And it's wild and it's wide open. And this is where being a classic liberal is helpful, because there's going to be things that you believe in and things you don't believe in. But you know what? We need to see them as all valid, real, part of our truth, and we just have to learn and accept and evolve. And I'm very open to it, even as I'm threatened by it in other ways too. But it just feels to me like what's happening. And again, I'll return to the theme of just humbling myself before it. And just, hey, this is, I'm such a tiny speck on a long timeline, and God knows where this is going.
That is a great note to end on. Yancey, thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for writing this book. This could be our future. And really good luck with Metalabel. I look forward to being a customer and hopefully a creator and involved in lots of ways. So keep us posted and best of luck. Hope the launch goes really well. If it's happened by the time that this is released, then congratulations on the launch going really well. Otherwise, I hope it goes really well. Either way.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thanks for all you do. You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. Special thanks to the sponsors for this episode: DigitalOcean, Mercury, and Neo4j. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.